Hello and welcome to Mary's Eclectic Interests. I'm your host, Sue Ellen Zagrabelny, and I'd like to welcome Christopher D Schmitz, writer, author, blogger, and public speaker.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a mouthful.
It was a mouthful. I will admit that.
I'm pretty multifaceted in my approach to life and writing and everything in between.
I would be very interested to find out about the process of writing for you and how you as a blogger reach out to other writers. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I have a blog to begin with, and point people there. If you go to my website, author ChristopherDSchmitz.com, you can click on the blog thing. It'll bring you right there. It's called Inside the Inkwell, which is just kind of my, getting inside of my head. And I try and share all the struggles and pitfalls that I've had as an author and things that I've wanted just to know. We were talking before the show began. Somebody had read my blog just about like, oh man, it's interesting that you talked about that. I always wondered about that specific thing, which was just specific, like how much do you charge for like an author's fee if you go to a library? And there's no real set number, but it's good to have something in mind and be prepared for a question before it comes up. Otherwise, you'll be caught with that deer in the headlights look, and there's nothing that says you're not a real professional like being caught completely off guard by what somebody else came with as like a pretty standard and basic question.
One thing that we also talked about off camera is to know your audience. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the question, what did you have in mind? Talk about how you talk to a potential person that's going to employ your skills.
Not sure that I quite understand the question, but let me.
Can I try again?
Yeah, absolutely.
We were talking about, if you went to a library and they maybe either weren't prepared to pay a fee or didn't know, what to offer, but you as an author can step in and say, well, what did you have in mind? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's nice to, it's good to have an idea of like where your set of boundaries are. Like if you want to do it for free, just say, oh, I always do this for free, or there's no charge. Even though as an author, if you're traveling to go to a library, there's always a fee. To you, there's always a cost, so not a fee, because you've got your gas, you've got your time, you've also got the hours and hours and more hours that you invested in drafting and redrafting, in editing, and all the other things that go with making a book. That, quite honestly, you as an author, you are worth the time that you invest in something. You're not going to get it all right away, but there is a real cost value to something, and if there's no fee involved, it's worth mentioning. I normally charge this, but I'm going to do it for free because I really want to come and engage with your readers. When I have somebody that's like, I can't quite afford, a couple $100, which is usually, it's a pretty basic fee. Like when I go somewhere as a musician or something like that, I tell them two things. One, here's what my fee is, and if they balk at the fee, go, you know what? I'll do it for less to help you out, because I'm not about making money. I'm about sharing, whether it's music or whether it's my words or I'm speaking or whether I'm writing. I want to connect with you as a person, whether I'm sharing a story or music. I want to connect with you. And you don't have to pay me, but I want you to know that there is a real value in having me. And we had discussed the idea when you bring in a band, which happens a lot of times, church youth group or something like that. We're like, hey, we want everybody to come to this fun event. We're bringing in this band, no cost at the door. When it's a band that normally would charge a cost, your attendance just dives through the basement. It's like if you charge $5, you're like, oh, it's only $5. Yeah, I'm in. But if you go free, you're saying it's really not worth anything. It's worth putting a fee on something just so people ascribe value to it. Mm-hmm. But it's okay to say, you know what? Here's my fee, and I'm going to send you a bill for that. I don't want you to pay it. Or you can do what's called a gift in kind letter. Mm-hmm. And a lot of authors don't know what that is. I'm like, you can send somebody, if you gave if you're giving away a bunch of books to a library or to a charity, get a gift in kind letter, because it says that there was a real value to something, which is battle number one, to tell people that you're worth something and to acknowledge that. Especially in Minnesota, we're like Minnesota nice, and we're like, it's okay to say that you're worth something. Pride is weird in Minnesota. We're like, I think we get afraid of being called proud, and so we be like way past the humble line and like self-debasing sometimes. But a gift in kind letter allows you to write something off, the real value of it, for your taxes, and at least then you're not just giving away and paying taxes on it to boot. And it says that there was a value to that, and that's something that authors don't think about either.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that as somebody that would want to put their work forward.
Well, you asked me a little about art and craft of writing.
Okay,
And,
yes,
and
please.
I had something just thinking. We talked on a different show about my book, Wolf of the Tesseract, which is a YA fiction book. And a lot of people, there's a lot of great YA books out there that everybody's heard of. Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, what's that? Catching Fires, The Hunger Games. All these different stories where a YA character is typically a younger.
Say what a YA.
Stands for young adult. It's typically a character who's anywhere between 16 and 19. If you're between 19 and say 22, it would be a new adult. It's basically YA, but your character can probably drink and get away with it. So it's just kind of a nuance, but the audience is basically the same.
Okay.
And the audience has really changed in that the readership has really transcended just teenagers, even though the primary demographic has been teenagers. And that's partly because of our culture, where our culture through social media and everything has really geared us towards being narcissistic.
Yes.
Our culture is very narcissistic. We're very interested in ourselves. Hence, that's the whole reason that the word selfie is a thing, because we're obsessed with ourselves, which is why I think the YA audience is bigger. But originally, the YA audience was created because we know that, there's this broader appeal for certain types of fiction within this group, but you also have to get a little bit in the mindset. And because the culture has changed, now a YA audience is read by two primary audiences, and then everybody else on top of that. One is the original YA audience, teenagers and and very young adults, and soccer moms. And that's actually, we were discussing the Red Sofa Literary Agency that actually came from them at a conference I was at that they did that, which I thought was very funny, but also very true if you've ever met a soccer mom.
Yes. Yes, they're reading their kids' books.
Yes, yeah. And not just that, but they're also secretly really enjoying them. Kind of like, I would have to admit that I was watching all kinds of cartoons well before I ever had kids, even as a married man. Like, we got to have the Cartoon Network, dear. This is a deal breaker if we're getting cable. But all that to say, when you're looking at writing a YA novel is dramatically different than something else, and not just in content, but the voice of the characters. So I know you had read my book, and you might have realized I use a lot of personal pronouns when they're speaking, because psychologically, when we're in that younger age group, like I say, our brain doesn't really develop until we're 24 or 26, and where you don't really see the broader picture and aren't able to very accurately place ourselves in somebody else's shoes and empathize, because we're still stuck in that psychological development where we tend to be more narcissistic than not. And so you write that into the book, you understand that's a worldview, and so the characters their bias is self-interest. Their bias is personal happiness, and they use more personal pronouns, and that's something that comes out just in the craft of it.
That's interesting, because I noticed that in The Wolf of the Tesseract. A lot of talking about themselves, talking about the other person as she or he, and so forth. Could you talk about the venues that you go to promote your books and to promote your blogs? Yeah,
I do a lot of, I've called myself and most people have agreed, I'm a guerrilla marketer. Like, I will just literally jump out of anywhere and try and draw a crowd because I'm worth it and my books are worth reading. Not because I'm super vain or about promoting myself, which I am, but that's because the larger view is that I want you to read my book because I want to connect with you, because I think you're worth being able to read my book because I wrote it for you. I wrote it to be read, which is, we're discussing earlier, difference between a writer and an author. So I do a lot of weird things that other authors don't do, and I find some success with it. So I don't do just the book signings.
Such as?
Yeah, so I've gone to book signings at both small indie bookstores as well as the larger chains. Actually, that's how I got right here. Was I met somebody at a Barnes & Noble book signing, and they're like, well, you're kind of an interesting human. So it's cool. I really am a human. You can look that up. But yeah, so rather than get focused on a book and go to places where people are who like to read books, which I also do, like the Rain Taxi Book Festival that they do out at the fairgrounds every year. Great place, a lot of great readers. Not everybody, though, that will be interested in stories are book readers. So I go to Comic-Cons where people like to come and dress up like their favorite superhero or science fiction hero or whatever, and meet people in the interest of a story and a genre and connect to them. I'm like, I know you like to read comic books, or you're a video gamer, so if you played a video game RPG, you read a lot of text on those lines as the characters are talking. So you know how to read, and you'd be interested in the story. Now I just have to put it in a context, make you really want to read it. So that's one of the things that I do. I've done, to that end, I've even had a comic book made as a prequel to my novel, Wolf of the Tesseract.
Would you talk about that? What's the purpose of that prequel?
Promotion, and to bridge the gap.
Yes. I noticed in the book there was no glossary or list of characters, and I understand that's
really helps, yeah. It also summarizes everything. So if you've read, I don't write just fiction, I also write nonfiction. My book, Why Your Pastor Left, which is was kind of almost written as if it was a dissertation, has lots and lots of resources and research. And I actually compile all of that in the back, because sometimes you just like, man, what was the number on that? And so you can just flip right to the back and go, oh man, there's that number. And it's really discouraging to see that this is the situation for the problem that I'm addressing in the book. So glossaries are great. And the prequel, I just forgot to put the glossary in the book in the final draft. And so the comic book helps address that as well, and it provides an overview. One of the things in form and function of writing that people, especially first-time authors, second-time authors, people that aren't widely published or widely written yet, what we do is there's two primary things, two primary mistakes that they make, especially as fiction authors and especially in the beginning. The first thing they do is they do an info dump. You read, and one of the books that I really love is Lord of the Rings. And in the movies, it works great in a movie, but not everything that works in a movie works in a book. And in the movie, on the intro, they're doing the whole like panoramic scene over Middle Earth, and you have Galadriel is speaking, and she's giving this book of Genesis. In the beginning was the third age, and like talking, sets the stage as the camera's panning over. Well, that's cool when you got something to look at. But when you pick up a book and you're like, so-and-so was this, and then this was that, and this was that, and after that was that, the word was, you could, and I tell young authors this, I'm like, you should never, if you go through and you count the number of times you use the word was, which is the granddaddy of all passive voice verbs.
Yes.
If you have more than one on a page, you're in trouble. If you have more than 3 in 5 pages, you need to go back and look at how to tighten up that writing, because that throws you out as a participant in the story. When you're with something, and so here's how it was. Jack was running and Jack was fast and Jack was catching Bob. Jack ran fast and caught up to Bob. It's much more, it engages. You are there. You might even be Jack. But if all this means you're not there running alongside him, it means that you are standing in the back,
Observing.
watching him.
Yep, observing.
And that's difficult to do. It's okay in a movie to have that kind of sense, but it's difficult when you're writing. So that's the passive voice, and then the other one was info dump. Very often info dump is also very passive, but you're providing everything rather than trusting the reader to figure it out on his own. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's always young authors that when they're interacting with me, they're like, you don't provide enough details in your book. I'm like, I don't need to know how many freckles Joan had on her cheek. Mm-hmm. I want to have enough creativity in my mind to figure out what they're going to look like. Like in Wolf of the Tesseract, I think that Claire is blonde. I don't mention anything else about her. And that was one of the things somebody actually told me, was like, you don't give enough details about her. I'm like, you probably have an idea of some blonde girl that's pretty cute. That's the main character. There she is. Mm-hmm. I don't need to discriminate in people that the image that you would create in your mind. I don't need to tell you no by telling you what this is, when it doesn't really matter in the context of the book.
Yes, having the whole idea of the picture in your mind. When I read, that's one of the most important things that I have, is I have the picture in my mind. The author knows that I've got a picture in my mind, and he or she gives me the latitude to create that. Mm-hmm. And I appreciated that there were clues, but not the person looks like this and speaks every...
The only details you want to give are ones that are really important. Everything else is a framework. And as an author and as a writer, and because people that are watching this, everybody has a story. When you go and you meet someone like, hey, I'm a writer, this is my book, like, oh, I've written a book, or I'm writing a book. Everybody has a story, and that's what makes each of us unique and awesome, is that our lives, as well as our imaginations, are filled with stories. But you have to trust that other person with your baby, because the story's yours. But once you put that out into the written world, you're freeing that up to live with everybody else. And you can't always keep and maintain strong control on it. So you have to trust the readers to a degree and understand that the story is yours until you've printed it. And once you've printed it, it begins to belong to the readership at large.
That's right. You have to let your baby go, mm-hmm. and walk and run. And that's a hard thing to do, even doing a television show. Mm-hmm. To put it out there, perhaps open it up for criticism.
Yes.
That's really hard. Having the idea that somebody gives you a critique and you say, they don't understand it. It's totally not what I meant.
Yep. I have some author friends of mine, and one author, I'm pretty sure it's her and not the other one, because both of them kind of did this in their books. It's either Tracy Ball or Mary Ellen Bramwell. They're both with the same publisher that I am with Wolf of the Tesseract, and that's how we got to know each other. And she got like 6 one-star reviews on Amazon by readers. They were really upset because it ends on a cliffhanger. And she was just like, I can understand 1 or 2, but I'm getting all of these where they're just upset. And sometimes you just gotta take your lumps and understand that as an author, we really do take people that we don't like and kill them in our books. It's fine to do that. We all do it. It sounds mean and cruel, but sometimes it's really entertaining. Laughing in the control room. So I mentioned Wolf of the Tesseract. I've got a sequel in the works, almost done, Through the Dark Gates of Koth. And I have a book. What inspired me to write that was I had a couple of really bad 1-star reviews. And the people didn't even read the book. They were just what's called an internet troll. Internet trolls live and feed off of just causing trouble. They would be like gremlins, except for they're real. They're real human beings with too much free time on their hands, and their parents have good Wi-Fi. So Anyway, I wrote this book called One Star, which came up to that. It was about an author. It was really a reverse of Misery. And I sat down. A novel, people set the minimum bar at a novel. It's either 40,000 words or 60,000 words, depending on who you ask. I wrote, I think over about a week, I wrote a 35,000 word novelette called One Star about kind of the opposite of Stephen King's Misery, where instead of a fan kidnapping an author, it was an author who just lost it over this one-star review that was wrecking their life and found out where this guy was and kidnapped him.
Oh, I love it.
It was, I really enjoyed it. And as it really was just catharsis for me. That's what started it. And then once I got into it, I'm like, well, what was the book that he wrote? And the book that he wrote, it turned out, was kind of this big, he turned out that he was actually writing something that was real in the end, because he was kind of a supernatural, paranormal writer, kind of horrific, and it turned out that all of that was real stuff. And then I reused that bad guy as the bad guy in the book that I'm writing. So it's kind of it's in the series, in the trilogy, there'll be book 1, 2, and 3, but there'll also be book half, which is the comic book, and then book 1.5, which would be One Star. So use everything you got. Tie it all together as an author. There's no harm in recycling your stories either.
Right, and people like characters that they like, and they like to see them again, because I can't tell you how many books I've read that I've been so sorry that the pages ended, because I want to know more about this person. I want to know what happened to that person, how they're going to resolve what kind of conflict they had, because too many times good books leave lots of untied up situations.
But if you're going to tie them up, a good author will also ask new questions and then leave that out there again so that you're asking new questions. One of my favorite storytellers, modern day age, he's not necessarily an author, be J.J. Abrams.
Yes.
He always, every time he answers a question, he leaves you with 2 more. And the books that I really love that are ones that, at the end of the day, it's like, well, I've got resolution on the overall story, but I'm so conflicted because I want more. And yet, it also leaves me free to choose how to resolve that in my mind, which is Abrams trusts his audience to let them choose their own ending.
Right, and the idea that you can look ahead to these characters and finish them in your own mind in whatever way that you think is appropriate.
There was it was a J.J. Abrams movie. Was the low-key sequel to Cloverfield called it was called something Cloverfield Lane, which didn't really seem tied to that other movie at all in the grand scheme of things, except for that was going on in the background, kind of this giant monster that was attacking New York, but then there was also some other monsters, and they were stuck in this rural area, and it's a kidnapping story, and she gets out and decides that she's going to go off and fight these alien monster things. And I believe that he resolved it, but I told my wife, I'm like, he should have ended it right there, which was probably the original intention, but probably tested better in a different marketing pool. But she's standing at a crossroads. She can go and either join the fight against these monsters or go down this other road where it's safe. Literally standing there in front of a cross-section where somebody had painted the arrows to the 2 different cities, and the radio's playing, telling you this way to safety, this way to conflict, to lend aid. And she went towards the conflict, if I remember it correctly. I could be wrong. But the perfect ending is I got out of the kidnapping situation. I'm strong now. I realize my inner strength. Which do I do? In my mind, I picked that she goes to battle. So the movie agrees with me because she's a strong character.
But it would have been even more effective if it had been
left it. And then the audience chooses. Because then what if the reader or the watcher in that case is somebody that really still is unsure of themselves? Or like differences between men and women. You know, men will take more risks. Women want safety. My wife's like, if you could do a 9 to 5 and if you got this big paycheck or whatever, I'd love to just be safe and secure and know that everything's taken care of.
Well, I don't think you can say that universally. I think
Well, no,
you have
it's not a universal principle.
no, but the idea that women are acculturated to not take risks,
Right. Yeah.
and
Which is getting better, by the way, with movies and with stories.
yes, women are coming off as much stronger characters, and women directors are doing a much better job of pulling that off. And I like the women characters in your book, The Wolf of the Tesseract, because they were strong women.
Yeah.
And even though they were confusing, I will admit that, because I needed my map to keep track of what universe I was in.
One of the scenes where we're discussing this, the whole nobility, where the guy is literally just losing his mind, the heel in the story, and lost physically. He's even hitting this girl, and she just kind of, gets slapped in the face. She just turns back and just like, I won't let you control me even in this. I'm not going to lash out, because there were some things at stake emotionally in the scene, and she was the strong one.
Mm-hmm. And so the idea that, going back to this movie where the person was at the crossroads, leaving cliffhangers is not a bad thing.
Right.
I think that that's very effective. We are getting to the end of our time.
Already?
Very
Oh,
quickly,
wow.
very
Okay.
quickly. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to add whatever else you'd like to.
Check out my blog. If you go on there, if you want to connect and ask me questions about writing, I'd love to answer stuff. Maybe I've encountered it in the past and have insight, or maybe it will put me on a new road to learn something new, because I don't know it all. But if you check that out, it's www.authorchristopherDschmitz.com. Click the blog link and you'll find me.
Perfect. Christopher D. Schmitz, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us at Mary's Eclectic Interests. Goodbye for now.
What makes your community feel like home? Is it knowing what's happening in your neighborhood? Or when people know your name? Connections make us a community. For more than 30 years, Northwest Community Television has connected citizens, neighbors, even sports fans through video. You can learn about the latest news through our truly local newscast. We cover and air around 150 high school sporting events every year. For our cities, we air parades and city meetings that you can watch whenever you want. Then, any citizen of our cities can create and share their own original content. We'll even teach you how to use the equipment too. We have always provided you with a connected community experience, and as life gets busier than ever, we will continue to engage, inform, and inspire through CCX Media, so you can stay connected to the place you call home.